What is surprising about the Jeffrey Goldberg piece, Sean Spicer? So the audience knows Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, who's got a terrible history as a reporter. I mean, just go watch Glenn Greenwald today. Go watch Glenn's Twitter feed, and he'll explain to you all the background of Jeffrey Goldberg. He has dropped more stuff about John Kelly thinking Trump is Hitler, admires Hitler, wants to be like Hitler, wants the generals to be like Hitler in specific. We've heard all that. We know all of that. John Kelly's been jumping up and down ever since Trump fired him, trying to tell us that. So other than now there's audio, like what is the surprise of the Atlantic piece?
Nothing. And I think that's, if you're a Trump hater and you were never going to vote for Trump, you're like, oh my gosh, he's exactly the person I thought he was, because Jeffrey Goldberg has this story about this soldier that this family that had to deal with a funeral, et cetera, that's somehow novel and is being denied. There's nothing new. I mean, that's the bottom line, is that Goldberg is basically going to the well and saying, I don't like the trajectory of this race. What can I throw out at Trump right now to get people more fired up? But as Mark said, it's, a lot of it is not credible. It's not verifiable. And there's plenty of people who are debunking it. And there's nothing in that story that I think anybody's going, God, that's new. So, I mean, I think it's all in the eye of the beholder at this point. If you hate Trump, it's one more piece of evidence why I don't like the guy. But if you've seen the movie, this is sort of like Scream 8. Like, you have a feeling that, Ghostface is going to go after them at the end. It's so predictable what's happening.
The other piece of it is the John Kelly thing. John Kelly also was on CNN, and he spoke to the New York Times. We've got the audio of his claims, which, I mean, I've heard them. I've heard these claims many times. I think only leftists think now adding his audio or his face to it, Dan, is going to change things for people. This has all been baked in the cake. The second piece of the story is that Trump allegedly offered to help with the funeral expenses for this military family. And then when he was allegedly billed $60,000 for the funeral expenses, said something like, it doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. And he and his people have denied it. The family is still standing by Trump and they're taking issue with this reporting. Look, you tell me, Dan, what is the Democrat thinking behind this is gonna do it? Like, for the people who can't pay their rent, their electricity bills, their grocery bill, this language, even if true, John Kelly's opinion that he wants generals like Hitler, if true, is gonna do it.
I don't think it will. I think it's great cocktail chatter. It's gossipy. It's salacious. I don't think anyone who's at this point doesn't know who they're voting for. To me, where I think the Harris campaign is starting to focus, and I think it is worthy of discussion, is it is unprecedented, whether in a presidential, a gubernatorial, or a Senate race, for so many senior people who served a leader to speak out against him or her. That, to me, is much better terrain for the party, and I think worthy of someone to consider in their vote. But all of this, look, Trump, has a potty mouth, and he says wild and crazy things. To your point, I believe this is well baked into the cake, and it's not going to move somebody in suburban, Philadelphia or Milwaukee at this point.
Megyn, can I make one quick point that Dan's? What is unbelievable, and I am always reluctant to give the Democrats any advice, especially this close to an election. But to Dan's point, the strategy, sometimes you want to jump through the screen and say, like, you guys have so missed the mark, right? When she does these interviews, like the one she did yesterday, was asked, what would you do differently? Or what's one policy that you would change? And her answer is, well, I don't want to criticize the president. I mean, that's the lamest thing I've ever heard. There are layups in politics, and she misses the layups. This strategy of somehow just like, I think Dan just articulated this perfect. If you wanted to go after him, say, when in history have we ever seen this many people this close to a president not want to support him? They can't even do the basics on the messaging. And I scratch my head over and over again saying, why do you guys not get this?
Megyn, Mark, I'll get you to weigh in. I do want to just add this because in defense of President Trump, Mark Meadows, he tweeted out the following on X. I was in the discussions featured in the Atlantic's latest hit piece against President Trump. Let me say this. Any suggestion that President Trump disparaged Mrs. Guillen or refused to pay for her funeral expenses is absolutely false. He was nothing but kind, gracious, and wanted to make sure that the military and the U.S. government did right by Vanessa and her family. Go ahead, Mark.
There are two things that run parallel. Tens of millions of our fellow citizens believe that Donald Trump is morally unfit and disqualified from serving as commander-in-chief because of the mindset and the conduct that the Atlantic article purports to illustrate. Parallel to that, the vice president has decided that her closing argument is not, I will help middle-class families achieve their economic and other dreams, but rather Donald Trump is a bad guy whose character disqualifies him from serving for president. That's the Liz Cheney argument. It's what Barack Obama has focused on. It's what a lot of their advertising is about now. That's where their focus is. And the power of the Atlantic piece is simply that in one news cycle, or maybe two, that's what the dominant media is leading with. Is that going to persuade undecided voters? Maybe. Is it going to inspire the base? Definitely. And they've got to do both right now. So I think it's a mistake from Democrats I've talked to who are very skeptical. This is the message Joe Biden ran on. It didn't work for him. For whatever reason, they've turned to this as their message. And so if you're running this campaign in particular, the Harris campaign really likes to play off what's in the news. So they spent 2 days attacking Donald Trump for going to McDonald's. They want things in the news that speak to Donald Trump's character. And that's why the Atlantic story, suspiciously timed for 2 weeks before Election Day, gives them 24 hours to talk about that, dovetailing earned media with their chosen message. That's why it matters. One day, with 2 weeks to go, they get to dominate the news with this thing.
Well, and what's
so dumb for them to keep
is,
that McDonald's story running, though. Such a good story for Trump. The smart political move is ignore it. It didn't happen. Move on. Yeah. I don't want to reinforce that great image for him. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, too, is the Democrats' research, both the campaigns and outside groups supportive of the campaign, have really shown that when surrogates make the attacks against Trump, they fall flat. The only thing that apparently moves the needle is when Republicans themselves speak out. So unless John Kelly and all of these people are going to show up at rallies and, look into the camera and really detail this, there is no qualitative or quantitative data that this moves votes. And that's frustrating.
Hey, Megyn, since you name-checked McDonald's, can I make one quick point on this? Because it's blowing the idea that a Saturday visit for like 20 minutes to McDonald's is still blowing minds on the left. McDonald's put out a statement, which is awesome because you have people like Garrett Haake and Hallie Jackson at NBC News using the phrase, Trump, without evidence, falsely claims she worked at McDonald's. This is McDonald's statement. Though we are not a political brand, we've been proud to hear former President Trump's love for McDonald's and Vice President Harris' fond memories of working under the arches. While we in our franchises don't have records for all positions dating back, like they can't even corroborate that she worked there. And that doesn't, they've now piled on. And I know that McDonald's was trying to get out of it, but like this story, which should have just been left by the left, they've dug themselves into a deeper and deeper hole to the point where McDonald's has to put out a statement saying, we have no record of her working here.
Right. Why would you do such a thing? But now here's this. So John Kelly doing the media tour, trying to own the cycle. I get it. And I get that he hates Trump. He was fired. I mean, I'm not trying to impugn his ethics, but he was fired. And so one doesn't know exactly what went down between the two of them behind closed doors. Clearly, Trump doesn't like him. Trump's made very disparaging statements about John Kelly, who served his country honorably in the military, and his son died serving our country. So we respect that and honor it. Here is in part what John Kelly told the New York Times. This is audio on the Hitler point. This one's for you, Sean. Saw it too.
He would commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, first of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist, life, philosophy, so that nothing he did you could argue was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason. And but he would occasionally say that.
What would he say when you would lay that out to him?
He just, that would be the end of the conversation usually.
He goes on to say, Sean, that it seems like Trump's raising, if he did, the issue of Hitler was because Trump had admiration for how Hitler's generals did as they were instructed, that he wanted compliant generals doing what he wanted them to do, and that Kelly was informing him that members of the military, members of the administration took an oath to defend the Constitution, not to do just whatever the president tells them to do. Because then he gets into how he told Trump some of Hitler's generals tried to kill him, actually. They weren't that loyal. Tom Cruise made a whole movie out of it called Valkyrie. That's true. But for the most part, they did do what Hitler wanted them to do, which is it's become a famous meme about how they say the best general that the Allied forces had was Hitler because he was so backwards in his strategy and his approach. And most of the generals did do what he wanted them to do, which is why they lost, because he wasn't a great military strategist. Anyway, this is just back of the envelope stuff on, historical Hitler facts. But I'm just trying to give the context. It seems like this came up, if at all, in Trump's frustration that his generals were not doing as he wanted them to do. It's true as a principle that they take an oath to the Constitution, but can you please explain for us why so many people in the Trump administration have turned on him? You were there. Why does John Kelly hate him so much? Why have all these guys turned on him?
It's an interesting question. I think there are some unique circumstances regarding some of these cases, why certain individuals, they were fired. In some cases, their advice wasn't taken. They were undermined by somebody else. The one thing, and we talked about this in the morning meeting, that I think is fascinating. There were several instances during my tenure where there'd be a story, whether it's Politico or the New York Times or what have you, where they'd say, in a meeting that occurred, this and this happened. And the four people in the meeting all agreed that never happened, that never was discussed. I'm not trying to impugn General Kelly's integrity or his comments, but I'm just saying that I always find it fascinating the stories that occurred during my tenure that never occurred, that had five sources, none of which were in the room. That got printed.
Well, let me just add something on that, but then I want to redirect you to my question. I want to add something on that. One of General Kelly's objections, as I read the New York Times piece in particular, or one of his comments was, he's very disturbed. The reason he came out and spoke on camera and on audio is he's most disturbed that Trump is talking about unleashing the military on the American people. And that is not what Trump said. What Trump said was that we have a great enemy within. People like Adam Schiff, who he thinks are undermining democracy and who's an enemy of Trump's. And he said, when asked by Maria Bartiromo about Joe Biden's prediction that there could be chaos on Election Day by Trump voters, Trump responded, no, there won't be, not by Trump voters. And she said, well, what would you do if there were, rioting on Election Day? That's what she's asking him. And he's saying, I'm not going to allow that. I would unleash the National Guard and, if necessary, the military. It's the Tom Cotton piece in response to the BLM riots. But my point is not to rehabilitate Trump on that. It's to say John Kelly appears to have an understanding of Trump's statements that is akin to something you might find if you watched MSNBC all day, which makes me not trust him or his lens through which he receives information when it comes to Donald J. Trump. This show encourages honest conversations, which isn't easy in today's media environment with big tech deciding who and what gets amplified. Well, there's a news platform that prioritizes free speech and transparency without controlling the narrative. Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that aggregates related articles from around the world, highlighting each source's political bias and corporate influence. Here's an example. Recently, CBS News told their staff not to refer to Jerusalem as being in Israel. And guess who didn't cover this? Left-leaning media. On Ground News, you can see more than 90% of the coverage is coming from right-leaning sources. Ground News has an entire blind spot feed with stories like this that are receiving lopsided coverage. It reveals how media narratives are shaping the conversation, and they're offering our viewers 40% off their Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to their website and app. They are independent and supported by subscribers, not corporate interests. Check them out at groundnews.com/Megyn. That's ground, GROUND, news.com/Megyn to take back control of the news you consume. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.